Today on Hashtag Lawyer, we have the founder of Rent My Wardrobe and the voice and face behind the Female Founder podcast. We're going to get to hear a lot about her mission and successes along her journey. Well, guys, we're excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. You're here with myself and my co-host Andrea Seffens.
Hey y'all.
We're live from our living rooms again, and I've been fired up for this one for a while. We get to have a guest here that's done a lot of really impressive things in the past 5 years here in Dallas. She's made a huge splash, not only as an entrepreneur, but as an influencer, and especially as a motivator to encourage and empower other women who want to start their own businesses. On top of that, she's a good friend of mine, and so I've been really looking forward to having her on. So we've got here Rachel Sipperly. She is the founder of Rent My Wardrobe, and she's the voice and the face behind the Female Founder podcast. How are you, Rachel?
Hi, that was such a kind intro. I'm blushing. Thank you. How are you?
You deserve it. You deserve it. You've done a lot of great things, and so that's one of the things that we're fired up to have you on here. So
I'm excited.
First off, how does it feel to be on the other side of the podcast, actually being interviewed instead of doing the interviewing?
It's so funny because last summer I did, right after we did our round, probably 10 podcasts. And then someone was like, you should start your own podcast. And since then, I think I've only been on, I don't even know if I've been on another one this year in 2020. So it's interesting to be on the other side of it again. I just asked you right before we started. I'm like, hopefully I don't need to know anything. Nope, just talking about yourself. Okay, good.
Well, hey, we're excited that we get to be your first one in 2020, and making a splash here. Well, obviously we talked a little bit about what you've been doing here in the last 5 years, but I wanted to kind of start just talking about a little bit of your background, where you're from and some of the things you went through growing up. I just think that I know your story, and I think it's really awesome, and I think it really shows how it shaped your entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting, I think, when people ask that, because in retrospect, you can look back, and I'm like preaching to my 30-year-old self, telling myself this right now, because I think at the time it never feels, never growing up did I ever feel like anything that I was doing was particularly extraordinary or unique or even not normal. And I don't even know that it necessarily was not normal, but I think looking back and thinking like, gosh, how did I do all that? Or how did all of that happen? And then it gets you to where you're going next. And right now I'm feeling like, I'm not doing stuff, or I need to be doing more. And I'll probably have that in another 10 years when I'm looking back now. But yeah, so I think, part of that is probably like innately entrepreneurial. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you kind of have that like itch and that burning from the time you're really young. I definitely had that. And I think perhaps that was maybe not normal, just this feeling of like something really big is going to happen, or there's going to be, some business plan. Honestly, as a child, I didn't think about entrepreneurship or going into business. My grandfather always told me that I should either go into sales or be an attorney. And then when I finished my undergrad, I was going to go to U of M for law school, and figured out that, I could do that and be $200,000 in debt, or I could go and work in sales and make $200,000, by the second year, hopefully. Right. So my grandfather told me, you can sell a product or you can sell juries. You're going to be selling the same thing. So you might as well skip the law school route. But it's funny, we kind of have that in common. I thought that's what I would do, is be a lawyer when I was a kid. But, I was always doing these like monetization hacks and doing little businesses, as early as I can remember. And again, at the time, I didn't know how all of that would layer on and kind of trickle together. But I grew up very humble beginnings. My father was a youth pastor, and, my parents, I had a great childhood. They took really, really good care of us, but there wasn't extra money to go around at all. They lived on very, very, they were very humble beginnings. So I, started college when I was 15, actually. And that's like a whole other story that.
Well, and I do, before we get there, I told you I was going to ask you about this. You got to tell the Jesus Rock story about when you were a kid. You've got to tell that story. Andrea hadn't heard it yet.
I have not.
The listeners got to hear it, because you talk about the entrepreneurial spirit.
It's so funny because I feel like I need to share more interviews on my podcast when I'm getting interviewed, because I forget that these things, and then they only come up when I'm on other podcasts.
Right.
So yes, like we grew up for the first couple years, we were in a parsonage, right? So it's a little tiny church in the church, or a little tiny house in the church parking lot. And we couldn't buy lemonade. So my brother and I would walk around and find rocks and paint them and sell them in a lemonade stand. And we decided to brand them and call them Jesus rocks.
Oh my
Because we figured out the church we went to. Anyway, it's kind of funny. So we would sell Jesus rocks, and people would drive by when they were leaving the church parking lot. We would, run up to their cars and say, "Do you want to buy a rock?" And then I think people were just like, "Sure." $3, and then I would say, "No, it's $5 for the big ones." And they were different priced. And then we had Moses sticks too, because we would find these big, like rods, and I think people like to use them, for walking or playing with their dogs, but we called them Moses sticks. So very early on, figured out that branding was key to sales somehow.
Well, and speaking of branding, I made sure and called them Jesus rocks, because on this show, if you start talking about selling rocks, it starts getting into the whole criminal defense side. It's got a totally different connotation. So I want to make that very clear.
This is actually really funny. My first real sales job that I applied for, they were like, "Do you have any sales experience?" And I said, "Well, I used to sell rocks." And the guy was like, he gave me the strangest look. I was so naive. I was like 21 years old. I had no idea that there was a drug connotation with selling rocks. And so for the rest of my time there, they always said, "Rachel, the rock seller. Rachel sells rocks on the street." And I'm like, "No, I really sold them like on the street." On the
street. Yeah, exactly.
Really building your case there.
Yeah. Just
well, and I do know that after you sold Jesus rocks and Moses sticks, you ended up raising enough money to go actually buy lemonade, and then you started selling lemonade instead.
Yeah, exactly.
So just, climbing that ladder.
It's just, just keep pulling in the profit pool so you can buy more. I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of, that sort of is what I did. I think, buy and build. Like in college, I would, buy my books every semester. And this is like, looking back on it now, it's like, gosh, that was so innovative, or how did I come up with that? But it was really just like I don't mean to say a means to survive, but I had to pay my tuition every semester, and I had to buy books, and I was too young to take out a loan. And there were child labor laws in Michigan. So you could, I had 4 part-time jobs, but I was working 40 to 50 hours a week. And so I still had to, come up with a way to pay for this stuff. So I would show up with a suitcase and $500 cash and say, "Hey, the book, if you're going to go sell your book at the bookstore, they're going to pay you $40. I'll give you $35 for it right now on the spot. You don't have to wait in line." And then I would turn around and sell them on eBay back then. And typically, would make 50 to 100% profit. And I made a lot of money every semester. My first idea for a startup was like a tickets and textbook kind of Facebook meetup app that would connect students. But, I was just always coming up with these kind of monetization hacks. And I think that's really what led into launching Rent My Wardrobe now.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of glossed over this just because you're so used to it and you're humble about it, but you started college when you were 15. I want to make sure to emphasize that for everybody, because that's nuts. That's why you were talking about child labor laws and all those kinds of things. And I know you were able to kind of you did a lot of college credits as you were finishing high school, but what prompted you to jump in like that at 15? What were some of the challenges you faced being that young too?
So what prompted, again, back to my ethos, I was trying to save money, and I figured out, and it was so random the way it happened. It was through an acting class, actually. That really could be a whole other podcast, but I sort of found a loophole. I had auditioned and got into this class, and then I had a student ID number and thought, well, if I just sign up and start taking classes, what are they going to not let me? Or, let me see if I can go on and sign up, worst case. Yeah. So, college started 2 weeks before high school. So I essentially just booked a full course load and started going to the classes. And then 2 weeks later, when high school started, I went to my guidance counselor and said, "I've already signed up for these classes. I know that you authorized me to take this one acting class, but I went ahead and enrolled in the other ones. the professors have allowed me to come to class. I'm going to them, I'm doing the homework. Can I take these classes instead of the high school ones and get dual credit? And so I did my freshman year of college simultaneously with my junior year of high school, and then my sophomore year during my senior year of high school. So I was only going to high school for one class, and then I was at college full time. And that's why when I graduated, I was really going into my junior year of college, I guess. But it came from, and this is what I always say, it was not a scholastic, like I'm not really actually academically smart. I have to study a lot. Like tests were very hard for me. School was hard. It was more of like a time saving efficiency situation that I figured out, okay, these are the credits that I need. This is the degree that I want. This is how I can take them. And this is how I can, I went to school all 4 years, Tuesday and Thursday, all day from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. because that allowed me 5 other days in the week that I could work. So again, looking back on that now, I'm like, how in the hell did I do that? How did I take 18 credit hours as a 16-year-old and work full time and graduate? But I think it was that like entrepreneurial drive that I didn't even necessarily know was entrepreneurial at the time. And now this feels like, I shouldn't say it feels like a piece of cake. It's definitely a very different sort of stress. But that time of my life, I was so busy and doing a million things. So when people say I don't have time for that, I'm like, can make time.
Priorities, right? So okay, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, you kind of mentioned it. You're the founder of Rent My Wardrobe. A company's been around for how many years now?
For 3 years.
3 years now. And I know I met you right at the beginning of when you guys were in the full-fledged startup mode. The idea had just been generated and you were hard charged. And so kind of, first of all, just kind of explain, what is Rent My Wardrobe? What services y'all offer? What's the platform?
Yeah, so it's a peer-to-peer fashion rental app. So we mirror the Airbnb platform, or you could almost say we're the fashion of Airbnb, but the entire premise is that we want to empower women to become incredible entrepreneurs and really give them a platform to have additional monetization opportunity outside of working in the home or outside of maybe the job that they already do. So girls always have clothes, right? And they wear them and then feel like they have nothing to wear. So the idea was to help women make money on the clothes that are just collecting dust in their closet and otherwise save money on outfits that they might only wear once.
Okay, and so I've actually been on the app playing around. They don't have anything there for me. I get that, but I've at least seen what the functionality is. And so it looks like you can actually, it works both ways, right? You can post clothes to be rented, and then you obviously can do your searching there. How's the matching process work? Is it just like a straight scroll through, or how does it work?
Yeah, so it's very similar to Airbnb, as you just said, that you can either enter the app as a lender or a renter. If you're a renter and you're looking for something to wear, there's all sorts of filters that you can search if you want to filter it by color or hemline or neckline, price, category, what kind of occasion is, if you're trying to go to a wedding, or if you're trying to go to a dinner party, a date night, you can filter it by those options and then find an item for you. And again, you would reach out to the lender and say, hey, I love this. I'd like to try it on. I'd like to meet up. And the exchange happens hyper locally. So what we started rolling out last year was kind of a white glove service. We have a lot of local celebrities or athletes' wives or affluent women that didn't necessarily want to maybe meet up or go through the friction of meeting with someone. And so we incorporated a white glove service where, we would deliver the items for you, and we still have that option available on the app. From there, we really migrated towards a membership model where instead of just taking the clothes and dropping them off, we're actually bringing you the items, dressing you head to toe, showing you what the jacket looks like paired with other items that you have in your closet. And that rolled into our now membership styling model. So I hired Diana Alford, who she was at Trunk Club for 5 years and the director of styling there before coming to work with us. And she started this year to really help us launch and roll out that program full scale, and then COVID hit. So we are transitioning that entirely right now into a virtual experience platform. which is super fun and interesting because we just, rolled it out, and it's interesting over the years to see kind of how the business changes and evolves. But yeah, that's what we're doing now. And, hopefully we'll be able to be back into homes within the next few weeks. I'm excited to see that Dallas is opening up already on Friday. And I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what the market temperature is for that, how people may change their perception on sharing clothes with a stranger, allowing people to come into their home. I think those are all things that we have to look at and see kind of what happens amidst this pandemic and this crisis, to see, if people are still going to be willing to do that, or maybe we find out that they're much more willing to do it because of the cost saving.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the stylist, that new branch that you guys jumped into, because you kind of already took the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, how surprising has it been that the initial model and idea you had is now morphed and shaped and done something totally different? Were you expecting that, or is that something that you kind of anticipated?
No, totally. I mean, I think most startups have a lot of pivots. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's a pivot. It's really like an enhancement and an expansion of what we were doing. But definitely, I mean, the market changes, right? Like, think about how different life was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. There was nothing like Favor or Postmates or these services that do this instant delivery, right? If you wanted to get a sandwich, you would have to call the restaurant, get in your car, drive. None of these things existed to make it instantly on demand, readily available. And so I think to have a viable startup, you have to be able to navigate the market and to really quickly, respond to that and incorporate features and product that can match that and that can give your customers what they need right then.
What's branching off of that, what have you done to kind of, like you said, monitor the market? Are there any things that you do specifically to kind of keep your hands around what's going on so you can figure out what you need to change?
I mean, I read a lot, not as much as I should, but I try to stay
None of us do.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is a really, really great resource. That's becoming, really kind of the social media marketplace, I think, for business owners. So I am connected with a lot of founders and investors on there and kind of stay up to date with what they're posting. Medium is another really great resource. It's really like a blogger site, but primarily, I'm sure you guys have heard of Medium, but business entrepreneurs, and you can kind of get a lot of the in the know gossip or what's happening on that. And then Crunchbase also gives, they send out an email every day and you can kind of see what the new funding is and what rounds people are raising. And there's a lot of, articles in there that kind of can depict where things are going and trending. I think it's, it's hard because it's a lot of combination of a lot of different opinions and a lot of advice. And then you as the founder have to really take all of that and assess it and say, okay, this is what my gut says is where things are going in the direction that we need to go. And obviously, given the COVID pandemic, there's an inherent challenge because there is no other side yet, right? And so everyone is trying to build these planes as we're flying it without even a direction of where we're going necessarily. And so I think that's why, you really have to trust your gut and be able to take that and assess it and then make a decision quickly and act quickly. But, be okay with failing too. That's the other thing that I always say, because you are going to fail. And, if you're in this like analysis paralysis and just trying to decide like, what do I do next? What do I do next? You're never going to take the step and actually do it. So you have to be okay with failing hundreds of thousands of times as a founder. Cause you're going to have things that you fail at every single day.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually, it's a cliche question, but what do you think has been the biggest challenge of starting up Rent My Wardrobe?
Oh, well, for me, the biggest challenge has been that I am not technical. And so Rent My Wardrobe is a technology company first. Right. And when I started the first year in business, I probably had 500 people tell me you will never be successful if you don't have a technical co-founder. and then maybe like 2 people tell me you can do it. And so I listen to the 2 people. Retrospectively, I would very much encourage anyone who has a technology platform to have a technical co-founder. You need someone that believes in the business, that is like eating, breathing it, living it. Because in the middle of the night, right, if our app crashes, I can't sit down and write a line of code. I can't sit down and actually go on and, it's very, very, very common in the startup industry to have, different engineers and different teams. And I've worked with some amazing, incredible engineers. I've worked with some really, really bad ones. And it takes going through, working with different people to kind of learn that and to figure out, what works and what doesn't. But like, I had to just figure that all out. I didn't even know what UI UX stood for when I started this. I was like, I'm just going to build an app and it's going to go in the app store. And I mean, there's so much, project management, understanding how the coding works and the back end and the front end and the tech stack. And like, I was watching videos on how to code in Objective-C on YouTube at night for like 6 months my first year, just so I could like even have a intelligent conversation with the developers or try to explain. But and obviously, 3.5 years later now, I know a lot more than I did then. But it's hard to do that. And, we've been able to do it, and we've been able to navigate, and, it's worked out well. And it's not to say that you can't do it, but it makes it a lot harder.
Right. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. I think foundationally, one of the big reasons Andrea and I were definitely excited to have you on here is you've been through these challenges, you've kind of come out on the other end. But, Andrea, you and I have talked a lot about trying to focus on bringing on women who've been successful and who have started things and we've talked a lot about that because Andrea, it has a lot of influence these days, and I don't think they're getting enough attention.
No, I would agree with that 100%. And I think that particularly within, I hesitate to use the phrase STEM space, right? But, you're, Rachel, developing a company that is completely technological while you're providing a fun service, fashion, and now the styling services, which I'm very excited about. I think that it's really important that, women are now being emphasized in the technology space, and that, you don't have to be Steve Jobs to start a company that serves the needs of women, but is entirely technological in the way that it is performed or executed. And so I think it's scary for a lot of young women who say maybe they want to go to college, maybe they want to be an engineer, or maybe they want to double major in fashion and coding, So I think women like you and your businesses are a really great example for young women who say, hey, if you want to have both, you can do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I think a lot of it, and this is like on my podcast, I interview founders almost every week, and the common theme that they all say is like they just had to figure it out. And I think that is probably, and I don't know what you would call that as a skill or a quality or a character trait, but the ability to just like figure it out and that's it, because there isn't a blueprint, there's not a manual, there's no one like telling you this is the next step, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do. And it seems like as much as I say, on the tech side I didn't know it all, but the rest of it, it's like you have to be able to kind of get in there and get your hands dirty, and there's going to be so much that you don't know. That's how you make it, right?
Absolutely. And it sounds like, you need to know enough to know what questions to ask. And like you were saying earlier, it's okay to fail, but it seems like every time you've, failed, I'm using air quotes here, it seems that you've taken a lot away from it in terms of learning, and you've been able to pivot or rebrand or re-emphasize the services that you offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say, I think Rachel Hollis says this, success is not built on a mountain of achievements, it's built on a mountain of failures. And it's like every time you have a failure, I see that. I guess I think a lot of it is perception, because I never really necessarily, I shouldn't say I never do. Imposter syndrome is very, very real. I was just talking to another founder yesterday, like it is so, so real. And it is so, people talk about this imposter syndrome thing, and, I have in the past not really related to that. Like I freaking relate to it now, like to the nth degree. but you got to see it not as like, oh my gosh, I messed up, I did this wrong, I did this, but it's like, what is the opportunity here? How can we make this better? What can we learn from this? And how can we utilize this information instead of just feeling like beat down, like, okay, well, that didn't work. Like, okay, well, what do I learn to try again and to try again?
Yeah. Well, and I love the fact that your passion and your goal behind Rent My Wardrobe is to empower women, because that funnels directly into you starting the Female Founder podcast, which I know Andre and I both listen to. And I love the tagline that you open every episode with is, and I'm not going to try to quote it because I'm going to get it wrong, but the idea of you want to empower women to feel confident and feel like they can go do it, because if you can do it, they can too. And I love that, because it goes right to being able to pull the trigger and appreciate those failures like you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always say that. I'm just a little girl from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I didn't come from an Ivy League family. I didn't come from a family, of entrepreneurs, but figure it out. You can do it. Sky's the limit.
No doubt. No doubt. And I think I actually wrote this down so I wouldn't forget it. One of my favorite things you said in your first episode was you're tired of this rah, 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 I feel good. Well, what now? Like, and you want to be able to kind of empower these women to go out and do these things. What have you've had a lot of great guests on there. You brought in a lot of very impressive women to come in and talk about what they've done. What do you think you've kind of learned as a founder being the host of that show?
I guess kind of along the vein of what I was just saying, like the epiphany is that, oh my gosh, all of these other incredible people that I look up to and that I admire, and I think that like they're way up here, right? And like they're dealing with the same stuff as me. They're dealing with all the same challenges. They're dealing in the vein of, a lot of the trait or I guess the common thread is just that tenacity to say, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to figure it out. But yeah, it's like, it's important, I think, and a big reason why I started it is because my first year there's so much more now, right? Like the internet has even changed a lot in the last 3.5 years, but
yeah,
there was not a resource. There was no one to say, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? And it's like, I think about my first year and really my first 2 years, there were so many people. I mean, I can really think of like 4 or 5 people that were just there. These were people that I met through the startup community ecosystem in some way. A lot of them didn't even live in Dallas, but they were like, I'm going to take 2.5 hours in the middle of my Tuesday afternoon to help you figure out this pro forma because you have no idea how to do finance, and I'm going to help you because you need help. And that's kind of the startup ecosystem of just like pay it forward. And there were some bad characters too. It's not to say that every single person was well-meaning, but for the most part, very well-meaning, very, very intentional mentors and advisors that said, hey, we're going to help you. And you don't need to pay me. You don't need anything. Like, we're just here to help you. And so I feel like it is my responsibility to continue that ecosystem and to be able to give back. And truthfully, of anything that I do, being able to help another founder is by far the most rewarding part. And that's just the truth. Obviously, I love when we, hit goals and when we have, big milestones, and when we, I remember the day that we got our 10,000th customer, and it was like, oh my gosh, like, how did we get 10,000? Like, that's crazy, right? But it's still not as rewarding as like a founder coming to me and saying, oh my gosh, you helped us and we just did $10,000 in revenue. Like that's for me just kind of and I think that's probably a lot of founders, right? And that's why the ecosystem works, and that's why people give back. But I wanted to be able to provide a resource guide to other business owners and founders that were starting out and really had no direction, because when I'm doing office hours and when I'm mentoring other startups, the problems that everyone is having, like they're all different, but they're all the same. Right. And they're all the same problems that I had, and they're the same problems the other founders I interview have. And so that's why it's like, we're all in this together. We can kind of lend a hand and help each other out, and you don't need to completely reinvent the wheel. So my goal with each episode is to, really give tangible tips and be kind of an index of anything that you would need to know, your first year of a startup. And so my goal with the first year of the podcast was to kind of have 52 different episodes that would cover everything you know, that you might need to know. Obviously, it's not going to cover all of it, but trying to give, you know, a resource to people to help. And I wish I would have had something like that when I was starting out. I mean, I had a lot of great people. And that's what I would say, definitely what I can contribute, you know, the majority of my early on success to is just from mentors and advisors that took a chance on me, believed in me, and said, hey, you know, I think you have something here. I think you can do this. So I want to be able to give that back to other people as well.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about resources. You know, Andrea, you and I have talked a lot about just with our show providing resources in a different way. And I think the resources in the ecosystem you talked about, Rachel. I mean, Andrea, we've discussed many times about law tends to be somewhat of an ecosystem, but I think it's really awesome that it's drilled down, not even just with founders, but female founders, that you're providing all sorts of resources to. I think that really benefits a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, you know, I'd like to maybe add this somewhere and maybe make it more kind of prevalent. Like the whole female founder thing is actually sort of a play on words that, and that again could be a whole other, don't even get me started on that topic, it could be a whole other episode. But, you know, I want to help founders regardless of what their gender is or their sex is. But, you know, be able to reach men and women. And I have a lot of guys on the podcast too. You're going to be on it right after this.
Exactly.
Part 2 episode.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, so we had kind of last 2 kind of questions we got to cover. Andrea had a good point. We would definitely want to talk about law a little bit on here. So Andrea, I know you've had some questions kind of regarding Rachel's experience with the law and how it affected her company.
Absolutely. So Rachel, you know, is there, given all of your experience, right, from Mermaid Wardrobe to the Female Founder podcast, has there been any particular experience where looking back, you can say, you know, I really wish I had an attorney to help me with this particular contract or this trademark situation, or honestly anything in general where you're like, hey, it would have been great to have an attorney there, or I think that this is an area where investing in an attorney actually is going to result in a lot of returns, or I wish I hadn't really spent so much money on legal fees in this particular area?
So I could probably, for each of those questions, give you like 5 or 6 scenarios. So the answer is yes, all of them. Here's kind of what I would say about this. And again, this could be an entire, I could talk about this for 2 hours. I'll try to summarize it. I think initially starting out, the first lesson that I learned that came to legal, because I'm actually from a family of attorneys. My grandfather was an attorney, my 2 uncles were, and so I said that already, but they, you know, they kind of had the whole ingrained, like, I think, you know, if you have a close relative that's an attorney, like, get the contract, get it signed, you know, not, you have to have everything in writing. I had that ingrained in my head. And so my first year, I spent a lot of money on lawyers to have really, really good contracts with really shitty people. And what I learned was you can have a really, really great lawyer and you can have a really good contract. And if you go into business or you sign a contract with a vendor who is not, doesn't have good character or integrity or whatever, like your contract means nothing, right? And so I had a situation where I had a bulletproof contract, bad vendor. I lost so much money. I mean, so much money, and I couldn't, it was going to cost me $50,000 to sue them. I could have sued them for sure. And I would have won for sure, but it would have cost me about the same amount of money that they owed me in legal bills. Right. And so then I sort of went on this like probably very dangerous pendulum of like, contracts don't matter, whatever, trust the people you work with and don't get a contract, because if they're going to screw you over, they're going to screw you over. And actually, in terms of entrepreneurship, if I had to lean one way or the other, I would probably still advise people to lean the second way, with the caveat of good contracts make good friends, keep it simple, stupid. Whatever you're talking about, have it in writing, right? Like you do want to have it in writing, but I think, and there's so many different factors, so it's hard to give like a general staple, you know, for all of it. You want to know the people that you work with and trust them before anything else. the vendors, if you have an obligation, or if you're in a partnership with someone that you have no history with, I do definitely think it's very important to have a contract. Depending, and again, it's hard to say for everything. I don't know that I would necessarily advise spending legal dollars on solidifying a partnership until it's like a year in, right? And so there's so many like nuances within the startup world that I would say it's very important to get a startup attorney when you're at the phase where you're doing a contract with a co-founder, you know, your cap table, your equity, all of that. Like you definitely want to have someone who's specialized in that. And kind of what I, you know, tell other startups I mentor is like, you don't want a cardiologist doing your knee surgery, right? Like you want an orthopedic surgeon doing your knee surgery, not a cardiologist. And that's kind of the same. And I don't know, I'm interested, I don't know from a legal standpoint if you guys agree with that or not. I mean, there's certainly great lawyers that can kind of do a lot of different things. And I think that's, you know, also if they have startup experience, one thing I did starting out is I had like a trademark lawyer, then I had a lawyer that was doing my terms and conditions, then I had a different lawyer that was doing, you know, our operating documents. That was 3 different attorneys. That maybe was necessary, right? Because those are all kind of specialized, but there are firms that are startup focused specifically, and they might have attorneys within the same firm that can talk to each other and you know, help coordinate on those things. I don't know if that answered your full question. Right?
No, it did. No, and I think you bring up a lot of food for thought, which is great, right? Because I mean, Austin and I were attorneys, so we're going to be biased and say, you know, like it's always good to have a contract, or at the very least, you know, paper everything up. If you have an agreement with someone, you know, send some emails back and forth so there's a writing. But I do think that the idea of you don't want a cardiologist doing your knee surgery is so appropriate, right? Because, you know, I've had some friends who, you know, for example, one of my friends wanted to start a catering business, and she was like, you know, can you draft me some like operating agreements for my catering business? And I was like, you know, I've never really done anything with catering, but, you know, I do everything from crash airplanes to, you know, copyright issues. So maybe I can find you someone who's a little bit more in that wheelhouse. So, I mean, Austin, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree 100%. I think, Rachel, the biggest thing you said there that I agree with is finding these firms that specialize with startup companies, because what I found, and I'll just go ahead and name drop now, but there's a guy named Kevin Vela, who's a good friend of mine that runs Vela Wood here in town. And the great thing about a firm like that is that they not only give you legal advice that focuses on you being a startup company, they also provide a lot of insight because they've seen a lot of startup companies. And so they're another great resource, kind of like your podcast about here's some issues you need to think about and all that. So I definitely agree wholeheartedly with what you said. And I think your pendulum analogy, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say Kevin's awesome. A lot of the founders I know in Dallas work with him, and I've heard great things. I haven't ever worked with him personally, but I've heard that he's great. Another one that I work with is Scott Christensen. I'd say those are probably the 2 main startup attorneys in Dallas. So if you happen to be here listening, that's who I would recommend definitely to reach out to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so parting thoughts, I just want to hear, and you don't have to disclose too much. We're not trying to get business secrets here, but I'd love to hear what's next for Rent My Wardrobe. What's the next phase? What are you thinking?
So we are, we just opened up nationwide virtual styling for men and women.
Wow.
So we just rolled it out last week. We're so excited and we've been doing lots of different workshops and virtual experiences. We're hoping to get back into homes for the in-person styling sessions, you know, as soon as the CDC lifts the restrictions. Dallas is opening up this Friday, so we're hopeful that by the end of the month, we will be able to continue our membership service. And expanding from there. We're excited. We're in talks with some exciting things right now that I can't say more on, but definitely big things ahead.
Well, good. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being on here. It's, as I said, I was looking forward to this. It's been a blast, and I'm sure there will be opportunities to get you back on here to talk more about some things like a legal panel and startup companies, all sorts of things like that, because you are such a great resource to our community.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and I think it's amazing that you guys are starting this. I can't wait to interview you on part 2 on the female founder coming up right after this.
Absolutely. Well, guys, check out Rachel on the Female Founder podcast. She's got a lot of content, a lot of great resources. As I mentioned, Andrea and I have referred to it. I've used it a bunch running my own firm. And she's also just an impressive human being to watch grow and build here in DFW. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.